This report does not seek to fascinate, it seeks to understand. Understanding is not excusing, it is refusing to let it happen again in the shadows.
He is an ordinary student and a rising star in local politics, answering phones at a crisis center to help those in distress. Friends and colleagues see a smiling, articulate young man who volunteers his time, wears a crisp suit, and blends seamlessly into the comforting fabric of polite society. It is a reassuring, carefully manufactured illusion. Behind this polished facade lies a calculating perpetrator responsible for the tragic homicides of over 30 young women. What does it take for an ordinary person to become a predator, and how does society fail to see it? Throughout this analysis, we will refer to our subject as the charming shadow. He utilized his disarming appearance to systematically evade immediate suspicion. The profile moved fluidly across multiple states, leaving behind a vast geographical web of crime, scenes that completely baffled local law enforcement agencies. He often deployed a deceptive ruse, wearing a fake cast or carrying crutches to feign vulnerability, easily convincing unsuspecting people to offer him assistance. Once trust was established, the subject lured them toward his vehicle, an unassuming beige car deliberately altered to conceal his dark, underlying intentions. This calculated approach allowed him to operate in broad daylight, exploiting the natural human inclination to help those who appear injured or in need. By masking his true nature behind a charismatic exterior, he bypassed the defenses of a society that only expects to find monsters lurking in the shadows. He operated within the political sphere and answered phones at a crisis center, presenting an outward image of profound empathy and dedicated public service. This facade was deliberately engineered to exploit human trust. He possessed an extraordinary level of emotional stability and fearlessness under intense stress. Psychologists classify this behavioral pattern as that of a successful psychopath, a predator who meticulously plans his actions while maintaining a highly respected social standing. Behind his charismatic exterior, the subject scored exceptionally high in antagonism, demonstrating a callous, manipulative, and deeply deceitful nature entirely devoid of genuine interpersonal warmth. He navigated the world with a chameleon-like ability to alter his appearance, using generic features to become anyone and no one at the exact same time. To his peers, he appeared competent, orderly, and fiercely achievement-oriented, masking his profound internal deficits with the polished shell of an all-American academic. Yet, clinical evaluations revealed deep-seated developmental fractures. As a youth, he felt intensely humiliated and socially awkward, driving him into isolation. To cope with profound feelings of inadequacy, he retreated into a highly structured, secret fantasy life centered entirely on absolute control and physical dominance. Through continuous mental rehearsal, this private fantasy life solidified into a predatory alternate identity, waiting patiently beneath his charming, carefully manufactured public veneer. His lack of neuroticism allowed him to function without anxiety. He could mimic normal human reactions cognitively, completely bypassing any genuine emotional resonance or empathy. By mirroring societal expectations, he created an illusion so convincing that even trained professionals and close colleagues failed to detect the void behind his eyes. The subject understood that people rarely look beyond the surface. He exploited this blind spot, transforming his perceived normality into his most effective and dangerous weapon. He used this fabricated charm to bypass the natural defense mechanisms of unsuspecting targets, leveraging social conditioning against the very people who trusted him. The deception was absolute. He compartmentalized his existence, relegating his dark impulses to specific mental frames while projecting an aura of complete innocence. His meticulously constructed persona provided the perfect camouflage, granting him the freedom to move undetected through society while harboring a growing, violent hunger. He viewed others merely as objects for manipulation, completely devoid of humanity. This profound cognitive disconnect transformed the ordinary world into his personal hunting ground. But maintaining such a complex psychological mask requires relentless effort. The pressure of balancing a pristine public life against a consuming secret compulsion inevitably builds. The facade was flawless, but beneath the surface, the tension was reaching a breaking point. The mask was beginning to slip, and the true horror would soon emerge. As his urges intensified, the carefully constructed boundaries of his mind began to fracture. The desire for absolute possession overwhelmed his capacity for caution. Yet the mask was fragile. The critical trigger occurred during his university years when a wealthy, sophisticated female classmate abruptly ended their romantic relationship. This rejection completely devastated him, shattering his manufactured ego. It reinforced his deepest fears of inadequacy and triggered a profound, irreversible psychological crisis. The subject felt entirely powerless and discarded. He immersed himself in violent literature, using these dark narratives to soothe the wounds of his recent romantic rejection. He spent years meticulously reinventing himself into a confident, charismatic figure, driven by a singular goal. He wanted to win her back just to reject her. This calculated vengeance demonstrated his extreme need for power. But the psychological damage was already permanent. His private fantasies of dominance were demanding physical realization. The boundary between his secret thoughts and reality finally collapsed. The ordinary student died, replaced by an entity completely devoid of empathy or human warmth. Driven by the toxic combination of childhood trauma and narcissistic rage, the predator was now fully formed, viewing other humans merely as objects for his gratification. The psychological fracture was absolute. He possessed the intellect to evade detection and the coldness to operate without a single shred of remorse or hesitation. Now that we understand the internal mechanics that built this predator, the chilling question remains: what horrors were unleashed when he finally crossed the line? This ritualistic behavior highlights a complete absence of effective empathy. He possessed the cognitive ability to mimic human emotion, but internally he remained entirely cold and detached. Driven by extreme psychopathy, the subject's internal urges required constant, escalating stimulation. As the psychological pressure mounted, the frequency of his predatory excursions began to rapidly accelerate. He operated under a grandiose delusion of invincibility. He truly believed his meticulous planning and charismatic public facade made him entirely untouchable by standard investigative methodologies. But maintaining such a high level of operational discipline demands immense cognitive energy. The predatory mind eventually fatigues, and the careful compartmentalization begins to slowly fracture. The predator was operating at peak efficiency, moving like a phantom. Yet, in the relentless pursuit of absolute control, every flawless system inevitably approaches its final breakdown. The mask has fallen, the investigation has concluded, and the psychological mechanics are fully exposed. We now have all the necessary elements to definitively classify this dark, predatory profile. The ordinary student was disappearing. What remained was a highly organized predator, ready to step out of the light and drag his victims into the dark. The profile's developmental history begins with a fundamental distortion of his core reality. He was raised under the deliberate falsehood that his grandparents were his parents. His young, unwed mother was presented to him merely as an older sister. This systemic familial deception severely impacted his capacity for healthy emotional attachment. Early clinical evaluations exposed deep-seated fractures within his seemingly normal childhood home. The maternal grandfather, who dominated the household, was a highly volatile and frightening figure. This tyrannical man frequently exploded into violent rages and swung neighborhood cats by their tails. The child absorbed this erratic, terrifying atmosphere in complete silence. The psychological damage manifested incredibly early. At just 3 years old, he was found smiling after placing butcher knives around his sleeping teenage aunt. This highly disturbing incident pointed toward an early-onset emotional disturbance. The young boy also discovered a massive stash of pornography hidden in a greenhouse. He secretly consumed this deviant sexual material as a preschooler, merging adult concepts with an already fractured understanding of human relationships and normal boundaries. The discovery of his true parentage only deepened his internal void. He realized he was illegitimate, fueling a lifelong resentment and a profound sense of humiliation. To cope with these intense feelings of inadequacy, he retreated inward. He began constructing an elaborate, secret fantasy life centered on absolute control and domination. As he grew older, this internal world required continuous mental rehearsal. He would wander the streets late at night, window peeping and fueling his dark obsessions. Despite his deep social awkwardness, he learned to mimic normal behavior, adopting the polished persona of a high-achieving, ambitious student with a highly promising future. In profiling, we draw a strict clinical boundary between a subject's modus operandi and his signature. One represents pure utility, while the other reveals profound psychological compulsion. The modus operandi is the practical methodology used to execute the crime and evade capture. It is a learned, adaptable behavior constantly refined for maximum efficiency. The profile's operational method was highly organized and terrifyingly effective. He relied on social engineering, actively exploiting human empathy to lower the defenses of unsuspecting targets. He meticulously feigned physical vulnerabilities, wearing a plaster cast or relying on wooden crutches. This calculated ruse triggered an instinctual desire to help a harmless, injured individual. When vulnerability failed, he pivoted to authority. By impersonating law enforcement or public servants, he projected an aura of safety that allowed him to command immediate compliance. His vehicle was actively modified for concealment. By removing the front passenger seat, he created a hidden void to transport incapacitated targets undetected across long geographic distances. He favored secluded secondary sites, carefully scouting remote locations where he could operate without interruption. This meticulous planning reflects an exceptionally high level of operational conscientiousness. But while the modus operandi ensures successful execution, the signature satisfies a dark psychological hunger. It encompasses ritualistic actions driven entirely by deep, unyielding internal deficits. For this subject, the signature was rooted in a profound need for complete, absolute dominance. He did not merely want to take a life. He demanded total possession. His methods of control were deliberate and clinical. He utilized severe blunt force trauma and ligature strangulation, asserting physical mastery while minimizing the risk of generating unwanted noise. The psychological compulsion extended far beyond the initial attack. The profile engaged in highly disturbing post-mortem rituals, treating the deceased as objects for his personal, ongoing gratification. He repeatedly returned to his secondary disposal sites to groom the remains. He applied makeup and washed their hair, prolonging his twisted fantasy of absolute ownership. To maintain this psychological connection indefinitely, he collected personal keepsakes. These stolen trophies served as tangible anchors to his crimes, feeding his narcissism long after the event. The subject operated with an arrogant assumption of absolute invisibility. However, investigators across multiple states began correlating composite sketches and sightings of a distinct, modified beige vehicle. The facade cracked during a routine midnight traffic stop. Law enforcement discovered suspicious materials inside his vehicle, including a mask, a crowbar, and heavy metallic restraints. This critical operational error provided a tangible thread. A survivor subsequently identified the profile in a physical lineup, effectively shattering his meticulously constructed illusion of the perfect citizen. Detectives utilized early computer databases to synthesize thousands of tips. By cross-referencing names, locations, and vehicle registrations, the subject rapidly ascended to the very top of the suspect list. Cornered by the encroaching investigation, he engineered daring escapes from custody. His movements became increasingly reckless, driven by panic rather than his previous cold, highly organized operational discipline. His desperate evasion ended after a violent physical altercation with a patrol officer over a stolen vehicle. The predator was finally subdued, but the legal battle was just beginning. The investigation shifted to forensic science. Investigators secured microscopic clothing fibers and distinct dental impressions from crime scenes, creating an undeniable, objective physical link directly to the profile. Stripped of his anonymity, his narcissistic grandiosity backfired in court. The meticulously maintained mask was completely destroyed. However, securing the arrest is only the beginning of what comes next. He treated the intense judicial process as a theatrical performance. He smiled continuously at the cameras, leveraging the unprecedented national media coverage to project an illusion of absolute control. In a highly calculated and desperate bid to manipulate the jury's sympathy, he even proposed marriage to a witness on the stand, officially marrying her during the ongoing trial. Despite his supreme confidence, the manufactured charm failed to conceal his underlying brutality. He was convicted and sentenced to death, forced to confront the absolute loss of his freedom. Confined to death row, the profile desperately utilized manipulative delay tactics. He offered investigators piecemeal confessions, attempting to barter his dark, hidden secrets for a delay in his execution. Ultimately, the predator could not outrun the justice system. His execution marked the definitive end of his life. But the horrific legacy of his crimes would permanently alter society. The profound devastation he left behind extended far beyond the immediate crime scenes. The severe psychological trauma inflicted on surviving victims and grieving families left deep, permanent cultural scars. His ability to blend seamlessly into polite society completely shattered the public illusion of safety. People realized that dangerous, violent predators could hide flawlessly behind a charming, respectable exterior. This realization forced a massive paradigm shift in law enforcement. The unprecedented geographic scope of his attacks exposed critical communication failures between isolated, local police departments across multiple states. To combat this new breed of highly mobile offender, authorities developed centralized national databases. This allowed agencies to track missing persons and violent crimes efficiently across vast jurisdictional borders. The investigation catalyzed major advancements in forensic science. Trace fiber analysis and dental evidence gained immediate national prominence, giving investigators powerful new tools to link complex, isolated crime scenes. Most importantly, behavioral science units utilized his specific pathology to refine modern criminal profiling. They finally understood how psychopathic predators compartmentalize their lives to operate undetected within normal society.
The mystery is over. The trump card is on the table. So, did you recognize him?
The profile we have been analyzing is Theodore Robert Bundy, known to the world and the press as the Lady Killer. Throughout this analysis, we referred to him as the Charming Shadow. This alias was chosen because his primary weapon was not a blade or a firearm, but an engineered facade of charisma and all-American respectability that allowed him to eclipse his monstrous nature and move undetected through polite society. To fully deconstruct this dichotomy between the polished exterior and the predatory interior, we will now evaluate his profile using the Pentagon of Evil framework. Bundy is officially linked to the homicides of over 30 young women, though investigators strongly suspect the actual victim count is much higher. He was exceptionally charismatic, utilizing a deceptive ruse involving a fake cast or an arm sling to feign injury and exploit the natural human inclination to help, rendering his targets vulnerable before he struck. Premeditation. 9 out of 10. The subject exhibited an exceptionally high degree of calculation and planning. He actively modified his beige vehicle by removing the passenger seat to conceal incapacitated victims on the floorboard. He extensively scouted secondary disposal sites in remote wilderness areas long before his attacks. He utilized props such as crutches and medical casts, and even impersonated authority figures to gain immediate compliance. His ability to operate undetected across multiple states demonstrates a sophisticated, adaptable, and highly organized operational methodology. Signature: 5 out of 10. Beyond the utilitarian aspects of his crimes, his signature was defined by a profound psychological compulsion for absolute dominance and possession. He engaged in highly ritualistic post-mortem behaviors, frequently returning to remote dump sites to groom the remains, wash their hair, and apply makeup. This need to indefinitely maintain physical and psychological ownership of his victims, along with the taking of personal trophies, highlights a severe psychopathic detachment and an insatiable hunger for ultimate control. Mobility: 10 out of 10. The profile demonstrated unprecedented geographical fluidity, exploiting jurisdictional boundaries to evade law enforcement. After initiating his crime spree in Washington and Oregon, he seamlessly relocated his operations to Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. Furthermore, following 2 daring escapes from custody in Colorado, he crossed the country to Florida to resume his attacks. This extreme mobility baffled isolated police departments and ultimately catalyzed the development of centralized national databases to track transient offenders. Resistance: 7 out of 10. The subject's resistance to institutional and investigative pressure was formidable. He successfully maintained a flawless public mask, avoiding detection by leaving virtually no trace evidence or fingerprints at his crime scenes. When finally apprehended, he utilized his intelligence to orchestrate 2 separate escapes from secure county facilities. In the courtroom, his profound narcissism drove him to dismiss his appointed defense attorneys, cross-examine witnesses himself, and manipulate the media to project an illusion of invincibility. Impact: 10 out of 10. His crimes left deep, permanent cultural scars and shattered the illusion of societal safety, proving that violent predators could hide perfectly behind a respectable, charming exterior. His case forced massive paradigm shifts within law enforcement, catalyzing advancements in forensic odontology, trace fiber analysis, and the FBI's psychological profiling techniques. The devastation he caused permanently altered the public consciousness, solidifying his legacy as one of the most prolific and analyzed figures in modern criminal history. Final score: 41 out of 50. Synthesizing these 5 criteria reveals a highly organized, mobile, and manipulative predator. What does it take for an ordinary person to become a predator, and how does society fail to see it? For Theodore Bundy, it required a profound lack of effective empathy, masked by a facade of high conscientiousness and superficial charm. Society failed to see it because we are conditioned to expect monsters to look like monsters. By mirroring societal expectations of success and utilizing human empathy as a weapon against his victims, he bypassed our natural defenses, proving that the most dangerous threats often hide in plain sight.
Some monsters are born in the shadows. Others are the shadow itself. The verdict is etched in stone, but make no mistake, evil never stops. It simply changes its face. Many more monsters await dissection on this channel. Stay vigilant. Case closed.